Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today, I'm talking to GQ Sports' Howard Beck to discuss the possibilities remaining this offseason for the New York Knicks. OG Anunoby, Joel Embiid, Paul George. We go over all of them right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. And if you want to become an everydayer, remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. But who's shilling for likes? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And today, Howard Beck joins the show to discuss what other moves the Knicks can make this offseason. I won't delay it any longer. Let's get into it with Howard right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, as promised, I am joined by Howard Beck, a reporter for GQ Sports and, of course, a contributor to the Locked On Podcast Network. Howard, things have changed a little bit since the last time you were on. No more Obi Toppin. Dante DiVincenzo is now a Knick. We're closer than ever to having the full 2018 Villanova Wildcats running MSG. But good to see you. I guess we can start here. How are you feeling about the Knicks offseason so far?
I mean, it's been a subtle one, right? They weren't involved in the draft. They haven't been involved in major trades or trade speculation, although maybe on the fringes of it to an extent. I didn't think free agency would necessarily be a big time for them just because of where they are in terms of their cap, in terms of the rotation. Things are fairly solid. I didn't think that they were a team that was that in a summer where free agency was going to be kind of meh anyway, right? Like this wasn't the sexiest free agent class. And in a summer where the Knicks were not going to be a cap room team, I didn't necessarily expect much. So I think, DiVincenzo's great and a great addition. I think it's obviously kind of a mixed bag in terms of offloading Toppin at this stage. If you want to call it a sunk cost, okay, but he's still really young. I know there were tensions there. I know there's, and he probably needs as a young player to be able to get more run somewhere, and certainly Indiana will give him that opportunity. But yeah, I mean, look, let me just address those two things since I've touched on them, and I will probably be going there anyway. I love a lot of what they're going to get out of DiVincenzo. Defensively, just kind of as a smaller guard who can play up a position or two, who's tough-minded, who had a really great run with the Warriors, and who he's just all-around solid guy. Like I think he's going to be a net plus for them, but they are adding him to a group where it's like that's their strength, right? Everything from point guard through small forward is where they're most crowded, and those are the three positions where you're going to move him around. So there's that. It's left a hole, obviously, at backup four and just in the front court in general. And I don't know what they're doing at this stage to fill that gap with Toppin gone. So I like DiVincenzo in the abstract, and I like him on pretty much any team. I'm not sure that was the area of greatest need for the Knicks. And maybe that suggests that as we record this, obviously we're barely a week into free agency, that there's, or not even a week into free agency, that maybe there is more coming here. And then just in the biggest picture view here, I look through 1 week of, again, less than a week of the offseason of free agency and trades and expected stuff. I feel like the only team that's really significantly improved in the top five of the East was Cleveland, getting Max Strus and George Niang, filling some serious holes that they had. I think Boston, I'm not sure if the, swapping out of Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis maybe makes them better, maybe it makes them a little worse. I don't know what the loss of Smart means for them yet, just as kind of the heart and soul of that team. Functionally, they might be better with everything Porzingis brings, but are they losing something in terms of the soul of that team, having lost Marcus Smart? But so Boston, I'm not sure what to make of. Milwaukee is essentially the same team. The Knicks are effectively the same team, I think. The Sixers are trying to figure out what to do with their Harden drama. The only team that's improved in the top five in the East, I think, objectively speaking, is Cleveland, and not by leaps and bounds. But so it's just interesting. I just throw that in there as just another kind of data point. As like, if you're trying to move up in this pecking order, have the Knicks done anything that significantly moves them forward? No. But there's still some internal development to perhaps rely on as well.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Fred Katz of The Athletic, who does an exceptional job covering the team, had an interesting article saying in his mind, the Knicks probably aren't done yet. And that coming out of that Miami series, the most glaring area of weakness you could argue was shooting. I think I would posit that it wasn't all that. It was an issue, but it was an overcomable one when Quentin Grimes was on the floor. But when the Knicks closed with Josh Hart, that became a really significant problem that became much easier to guard. And you saw scenarios where Jalen Brunson admirably had to go through 3 or 4 guys at a time. He did a pretty good job on that, but you don't necessarily want to build on that. If you have aspirations of doing better, you don't want to have those same types of lineups again. And Fred is arguing like you get more versatility with your bench unit with Obi gone, but functionally, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, Howard, you don't really change who you are as a team. So he had this note in there. League sources told The Athletic that New York has contacted multiple rival front offices this offseason with a similar objective. The Knicks have built packages around their promising young players that target prime-aged veterans they believe would help the current roster. If they flip one of their 20-something guards for versatile wing, that would change the context of the DiVincenzo signing too. So this comes as the same day there are reports out of Toronto that OG Anunoby is potentially available. And in an article, I think it was Michael Grange who wrote it, he noted, like, in particular, watch out for the Knicks there. And Anunoby's been a guy that's kind of long been, I guess, of interest to the Knicks. For me, I think it's more about who they play and how they deploy their younger guys. But unquestionably, there is, on paper, a need for like another like 6'7", rangy wing type guy. You and I were discussing Paul George last time around. Do you still see them making some kind of consolidation move to get that guy on the roster right now? Or do you think, to what you said at the end of your last statement, like there is some merit to just waiting on internal development and seeing, hey, it's quickly going to be an all-star. Is Grimes going to emerge as one of the better role players in the league? All right, guys, we'll get back into it with Howard in just a sec to continue our conversation and dive deep on Joel Embiid. Will he ask out of Philadelphia? And what would the trade have to be for the New York Knicks to get him and beat out a whole bunch of other teams? But first, I want to remind you that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Personally, I have done a lot of therapy in my life, starting at a very early age and continuing until today. And it has been an immense help for me because it kind of helps you question some of your assumptions about yourself, some of your thoughts about yourselves, and realizing they're not as ingrained as you think they are, and they might not be as true as you think they are. So it has a lot of value in that sense to help you move forward. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Therapy empowers you to be the best version of yourself. So visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Yeah, my guess is they're not counting on, well, we're just done. This is fine. Grimes will take another step. Barrett will take another step. Maybe Brunson has yet another gear to go to. And we'll just let it. I doubt that's the agenda. I mean, I think you can, even if some of these younger players haven't hit their ceiling, you can kind of see where they're headed or where the ceiling is. It's not like someone's going to turn into, all due respect to RJ Barrett and the strides he's made, I don't think too many people expect RJ Barrett to turn into an all-NBA player tomorrow. And it doesn't mean he's hit his ceiling. It just means, you look at this roster and if you're being realistic, do you have a chance to be, to be in the mix to make the Eastern Conference Finals? I don't think so, honestly. Like, healthy Bucks, healthy Celtics. Again, I don't know what to make the Sixers anymore. Those two teams are still the top. Sixers to be, to be determined. Cavs are really good, and you want to talk about internal development. Like, that's a team where you can look at Garland and Mobley and say, we're pretty sure those guys are making more steps forward, right? Like, the ceiling on those guys is very high. So the Cavs can rely on that, plus they added some guys. If you're the Knicks and you're being realistic about it, you're looking at those 4 teams, again, asterisk on the Sixers, and you're saying, are we there? By the way, I haven't even mentioned the Miami Heat,
I was gonna say, yeah.
who may get Dame Lillard. I do this often. I kind of it's kind of that it's that funny lingering thing from last season where it was like, oh, they had such a weird season. They they were they underachieved. Obviously, the Miami Heat should be in this conversation, especially if they get Lillard. If they don't, it's going to be a very interesting season for the Miami Heat after all the marbles they've put in that category, in that basket. I don't know. I'm mixing metaphors at this stage, Gavin. What am I doing? So then the Knicks want to move forward. You have to be able to take the next step. So the short answer back to your question, I don't think they're done. I think they're looking to make a move, whether that's an Anunoby, whether it's maybe Pascal Siakam, by the way, who I keep hearing floating in and out of speculation and rumors from other teams as well. But you have to be opportunistic. Nobody's available until they're available in this league. Guys are shopped. Guys are dangled. Conversations are had. All the stuff, all that we see on the Twitter feed every day, all the stuff that people like me hear every day when you're talking to people around the league. None of it matters until there's a real negotiation. And so it's a fine line between, when you asked it the way you asked it, it's a fine line between are they making the move now, or are they just kind of like waiting to see what's it's everything all the time. You can't make the deal for OG Anunoby until the Raptors actually determine that it's time to trade him, or Siakam, or whoever else may come into the discussion. And so do the Knicks have the assets? Yeah, sure. I mean, they've got a ton of picks. Granted, they're not, like, all first-round picks aren't created equal. Like, the Nets have better first-round picks to deal than the Knicks do. The Thunder have better first-round picks to deal than the Knicks do. But they have a lot of them, and they do have some good young players. So it just depends on who becomes available, and are you actually in the best position to make the deal among everybody? Because if the player is good enough, you're not going to be the only team pursuing him. If Anunoby becomes available tomorrow, half the league, a third of the league minimum, is going to be chasing him. And so then becomes the quiet competition, sometimes not so quiet competition, to make the best offer. So it's all very fluid, and we're early in the summer still. We've seen blockbusters in August before. I don't know that we should necessarily expect whatever the next move is to present itself immediately.
Yeah, and I think my stance on it is, and this is maybe being guilty of something you could argue Leon Rose has been guilty of, and overvaluing the Knicks' young talent. But if you're going to make that, and it doesn't have to be an all-in move, it could be RJ Barrett and like one of those picks for OG Anunoby. But is there a world where you don't want to make that move if it doesn't meaningfully like change your trajectory? Like I think you could swap RJ for OG straight up. Like I could throw it right to you, Howard. Like, does that change your opinion of the Knicks? Is that all of a sudden saying, all right, well, now they're there with Boston and Milwaukee? And obviously, like you sometimes make one of those moves to then make the move for the Paul George, make the move for the Joel Embiid that we're going to talk about in just a second. But I think I'm okay with them being patient if it's not a move, again, that's meaningfully going to shift things for them.
And I don't think Barrett plus a pick is getting you Anunoby.
Sure.
The Raptors clearly value him highly. They have had offers on the table or conversations in the last year or so that involved multiple first-round picks from teams. Barrett's a good player. I don't know that Barrett plus a pick is enough given what the Raptors' value of Anunoby is. I'm not even saying how I would value it. I'm
Sure.
just saying the reality of what we've seen and heard so far. Does Anunoby, does it, forget all the other stuff that may be in the deal. Does having Anunoby instead of Barrett meaningfully push you forward? Maybe a little. I mean, Anunoby's defensive abilities are pretty considerable, and his three-point shooting is great. And I think there's still a little bit more there. But is that the one all-in move? And by the way, that doesn't have to be the one all-in move. Maybe
Right.
It's that plus one more. They have enough assets to make a deal for him and still have stuff to make another deal. That's the solid position they've put themselves in. So, again, I think there are going to be options for them over the course of the next few weeks. And it may well be the player that we haven't even discussed or thought of, because that often becomes the case.
And it feels like the true, maybe this is too small of an animal, but the true golden goose here is Joel Embiid. He's been one of the names, obviously, with the connection to Leon Rose that's been mentioned since Rose took over the Knicks. I think the talks got a little louder and maybe not realistic, but a smidge more realistic with the rumors of James Harden wanting out of Philadelphia, though, of course, that could be on Joel Embiid's word that he wants James Harden out of Philadelphia and he doesn't want to be his running mate through Harden's mid to late 30s. But what is the latest on your end that you've heard on that? And to me, on one hand, those conversations seem premature, but I think this is kind of what you're getting at. They're only premature until the Woj tweet drops, like, hey, Joel Embiid has asked Daryl Morey and the Sixers front office to be traded out of Philadelphia. Do you see that as something that could still happen this summer? Or would it take a scenario where Harden gets traded, maybe for a lot of guys who don't shift the Sixers trajectory and they get off to a disappointing start to the year?
Yeah, it is both appropriate and too soon for the Embiid discussion.
Nice.
Appropriate because everyone around the league's been this is what the league does, though, right? Like, this is not a big deal that I'm going to say this. The league is constantly keeping an eye on these situations. All the other teams are doing this. Before Giannis signed his extension a few years back, everybody in the league had their eyes on the Bucks and Giannis and saying, oh, is he going to become available? Then they got Drew Holiday, then Giannis signed his extension, then they won a championship, But we're doing it again. Like, people are already looking again, like, you know what? Middleton's getting up there in years. He's been injured a lot. Lopez is up there in years, been injured a lot. How much longer is it going to last if they can't get to another finals? So people are keeping an eye on Giannis. And, of course, they're keeping an eye on Embiid ever since the Embiid-Ben Simmons stuff started to break down. And then you had the Ben Simmons holdout, and then eventually the swap for Harden. And now here we are again. A lot of this is just going to depend on what they get for Harden. And if they even trade him, maybe Daryl Morey's going to call a bluff again. There's no telling where this one's going to go. By now, we should all be clear on this in the NBA in general. Like, you just don't know. So what do they get back for Harden? Daryl Morey's a pretty good deal maker. And if they get the right stuff back for Harden, and they've still got presumably Tyrese Maxey, and presumably Tobias Harris and much of the rest of that cast, they're still a top team in the East. It's not a critical enough situation where Embiid should need to ask out based on, look at all this instability. I mean, like, they're still pretty good. It depends on who they get back for Harden, as I say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I guess I just from my perspective, I'm curious your take on this. I think it would take Maxey making a leap for Embiid, who's a very savvy guy, to talk himself into, we are a title contender, because I don't see a world where James Harden is coming back next postseason all of a sudden, right? It's consistent. Like, oh, okay, he's putting up 30 a game and he's teaming up with Embiid and he's carrying us over the top. Like, it doesn't feel like that's going to happen for him. It feels like even if he is back for one more year, at least in my mind, like, Maxey would maybe need to elevate to either the number 2 guy or the co-number 2 guy on that team. And look, Embiid, you could argue, like, I don't know how injured he was last postseason. Like, there might need to be some self-reflecting there and like saying, all right, if I was better, like, maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe we get past Boston, maybe we get past Miami. And if they were coming off a finals appearance, like, we're not having this conversation right now, no matter what. But is there a world where, like, he just looks at this current team, even if Harden's back, and says, like, hey, like, nothing's different. We're not going to be good enough in Philly, maybe because that Harden request was kind of in stasis, like, didn't really do anything in free agency. Like, do you see a world where they're meaningfully more of a title contender? Or, like, could Embiid come into the season and say, hey, we're behind Miami, we're behind Boston, we're behind Milwaukee? If you want to argue that the Knicks wouldn't be in a dramatically better position, I think I'd argue to the contrary. But what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, I think Joel Embiid, reigning MVP Joel Embiid, just had that MVP season, obviously, with this Sixer team, and has been on contenders with that team, for how many years running now. Never forget how much these guys believe in themselves first. Like, we're a contender because I'm me, like, that's where it usually starts. Now, if the supporting cast is as bad as, say, Portland's has been, then eventually Damian Lillard says, well, me is not enough. I don't know if Joel Embiid's at that stage yet. I'll just keep coming back to that. I don't know. You can't gauge the frustration level or the patience level of these guys sometimes until it's obvious. There's nothing to indicate to me, nothing that I've heard, that gives any legitimacy to the idea that Joel Embiid would want to push this right now. But let's spin this forward for a second. Worst case scenario for the Sixers happens, and the Harden thing drags out, and Embiid decides he wants out too. Or the Harden thing doesn't get them enough of a return. Or Harden's back and is miserable and is making everybody else miserable. Could Embiid ask out? Sure. All right. If it happens, then what? Well, the entire league is going to be trying to get Joel Embiid with the exception of the Denver Nuggets. I was just kind of glancing like, all right, who would be and when I say the entire league, obviously not everybody has the same need for him right now or the same chances to get him or whatever. So I started to scribble down just a quick hit list of like who would definitely chase him to me. This is based on no intel whatsoever. The Nets are right at the top of the list, and they've got a boatload of really attractive picks because the whole league expects the Suns are going to fall off a cliff in the next couple of years, and they've got all those Suns picks plus others. So and the Nets have other interesting pieces they could deal to. So the Nets would be there. I think the Celtics would be chasing him. Cavaliers could certainly chase him. And some of these teams don't have draft capital, obviously, like the Cavaliers draft capital is all in Utah, but Toronto absolutely would chase him. Sacramento, maybe. Minnesota, maybe. New Orleans, Houston. Not everybody's in the same position in terms of their ability to make deals. I just started looking around at do you have young players with upside who need that great co-star, right? If you're the Wolves and you have Anthony Edwards, and you're already pretty much, I'll keep saying it, they hate when I do, but I don't think Karl Anthony Towns is long for Minnesota. And Gobert is there, so I know there's a complicating factor there, but if the Timberwolves could find a way to pair Anthony Edwards with Joel Embiid, they would do it. And they do have valuable players to move. Again, a team with no draft assets because they're all in Utah. But Pelicans have draft assets. Pelicans have interesting young players. I could just, again, this is almost right off the top of my head. These are teams I was jotting down before we started taping. I think if Embiid is available, there's going to be an all-out scramble and bidding war for him. Do the Knicks have enough? I don't know. I think it's an open-ended question. Their young players are good, but I don't know if the ceiling's high enough. Their picks, they have a lot of them. But again, most of them are heavily protected or are going to be low in the first round or are their own picks. And if you're getting Joel Embiid, then your own picks are no longer that valuable because you're expecting to be pretty high in the standings and low in the draft order.
Yeah, I hear all that. And I think it's kind of the balance you're always trying to look at in the NBA. When these guys sign these long contracts, how much of an ability do they have to navigate where they want to go? And that's making a big assumption on my part that Joel Embiid's number one choice would be the Knicks, which despite the Leon Rose connection, despite the seemingly bright future there, who knows, right? They could be his top 3. They could be his top 5. No guarantee that they are number one.
Nor should we assume, by the way, that guys can always get where they want to go. I know people.
We're doing this last summer, right?
Right. We saw Mitchell last summer. We have yet to see where Lillard finally ends up. I know everybody's taking it as a given that he's going to end up in Miami, but ask Paul George how it worked out when he asked Indiana to trade him to LA years ago.
And that's a great transition, Howard, because he's the guy I wanted to finish up on. Someone we talked about last time you were on. And I give you all the credit in the world because you were ahead of it. It was I think a few days before it fully broke that all right, maybe Paul George could be available. I know Ian Begley a few days later had that the Knicks specifically had talks with the Clippers. And then it came out yesterday. I think it was from Alan Hahn. I'm sorry if I'm miscrediting that, but that there was a rumored deal that the Knicks declined. That was Paul George for RJ Barrett, Quentin Grimes, Evan Fournier, and 3 firsts. Of course, we don't know what those firsts were. I assume they would have been the Knicks' own and either lightly protected or unprotected. Is that a deal the Knicks should have made? Because I was going over it on Twitter, would have left the Knicks with a starting lineup of Brunson, Quickly, Paul George, Randall, and Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein, Josh Hart, presuming they still have the money, DiVincenzo off the bench. I think unlike OG Anunoby, that is a roster that you could look at and say, all right, if healthy come playoff time, I would put pretty close up there with the Celtics, pretty close up there with the Bucks, pretty close up there with the Heat. Is that something you would have done? Or is that a move where you're like, all right, that maybe would have been a little rich given his age and maybe most importantly, the extension he would have commanded?
Yeah. Always a little hesitant to, judge a hypothetical, especially like I did not see that report and I don't know where it came from, so I don't know how much stock to put in it. But as a hypothetical, it might be a slightly steep pay only because Paul George is 33 with a lot of recent injury concerns and missed games. I'd still want him. I love Paul George. I think Brunson, Paul George, and a combination of role guys around them is pretty damn good. I like Quentin Grimes, and I wouldn't want to give him up in that deal if I could hold him back. I'm not a big RJ Barrett guy, and again the sense I've gotten around the league is that people feel like, oh, he's a very good player, but like you can get an RJ Barrett. So I don't know. I think I would want to hold Grimes out. Maybe I'd want to hold one of those picks out. Maybe it depends on which of those. It maybe depend on which of the picks it is. Right? Again, they have all these picks. They're not all equal by any stretch. And it might depend on the protections on those picks. So there's a lot of depends in that. And yes, Paul George is going to want the extension, which you have to factor in. And now you have payroll concerns that go hand in hand with that because of all the new CBA rules. But man, I mean, Brunson, Paul George, another in a supporting cast that's solid, that has the requisite amount of 3-point shooting and playmaking, defense. You've got a shot. You got a shot to do something. I'm still high on Paul George. So if it were me, I'd have been tempted maybe with a tweak or two to that hypothetical.
Yeah, and I think we can wrap up on this, but I think there's a balance to be struck there, right? Because we just spent 10 minutes talking about Embiid, and again, even in the perfect world where he becomes available, could you even get him? And how do you strike that balance, I guess, between like saying like, hey, like the perfect star, the perfect trade, like it's maybe never quite going to be there. And last year, I think maybe you disagree. A year in the rearview mirror, I'm fine with them not getting Donovan Mitchell. I mean, heck, he might just come here on his own volition in 2 seasons. But what is that balance for the Knicks going forward between saying, hey, like we want to wait for the right guy, the right time, the right contract, the right age, versus like if a star is available and like you're doing a trade there, if you're the Knicks, like you're not giving up your 2 best players and Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, you're bringing someone like Paul George, like should they try to make that kind of move?
So I was fine with them not getting Donovan Mitchell, and I was mostly because I didn't think Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson made sense together. And Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, it remains to be seen how much they make sense together. I mean, they make more sense because of the defense they have behind them in Cleveland. But even then, you saw the way they kind of malfunctioned against your team, right? So, if they had not signed Jalen Brunson when they did, I would have said, oh, they should be all in on getting Donovan Mitchell because they needed a starting point. But now Jalen Brunson is at a really high level where you have your star guard. I don't think you want an undersized backcourt. So I still don't think Donovan Mitchell is the answer there. So the answer to the question about like when you should be all in on the star, it's always going to depend on the star to me. Joel Embiid obviously fits. Joel Embiid fits just about everywhere. Paul George absolutely would fit, albeit a little bit older than ideal for where the rest of this team is. But still, functionally, he would fit. I mean, the other one to keep your eyes on, and I know it makes probably a lot of Knicks fans cringe, but I still, like, again, I'll go back to Towns. Towns is the next guy I think that's going to be available. And I don't know that it's happening this summer, but especially because of payroll concerns and CBA concerns, again, with the new deal, fit concerns, everything, all kinds of concerns. I think it's inevitable, and I've said it many times, I think it's inevitable that Karl-Anthony Towns gets dealt. You talk about Embiid's ties with Leon Rose, it's the same thing with Towns. Obviously, Joel Embiid's a much better player, but this is some combination of which star is actually going to be available and when they're available, and is it the right fit? If it's a guard, James Harden, no, I don't think the Knicks should be all in on James Harden. We haven't even discussed that possibility, but that has been floated in the last week. I definitely don't think they should be all in on James Harden. I don't even necessarily think that they're the right Lillard fit, again, because they've got Brunson there. Lillard's a better player, but Lillard is older, and I don't see the undersized backcourt as being feasible. It didn't work for Lillard all the years that he's been in Portland. So it has to be the right star, and they have to have the right package to get him. So I I think they're making that move at some point, but I think they're being smart and waiting for it to be the right guy and not being all in on somebody who might not be the smartest fit or who's too old for this lineup.
They've been extremely patient. I think they will continue to show that with maybe a move on the margins, and maybe I don't know, maybe they go on at some point. But Howard Beck, thank you so much for coming on once again. Before I let you go, can you tell everyone one more time where they can find all your great work?
Appreciate it. Yeah, still on Twitter as long as it's still functioning at Howard Beck, but I'm also on Blue Sky for anybody who's fortunate enough to be on there yet. It's building slowly. All my work is on my Authory page, which is author with a Y on the end, authory.com/Howard Beck, and still writing for GQ Sports.
All right. Thank you again, Howard. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We'll be back later this week with a mailbag episode. Until then, we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.